right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Alberta Nonprofit Network webinar. I'm Shannon Rex, Executive Director of Fuse Social here in Fort McMurray, Wood Buffalo, and ABNN Network Steward. And thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. It's great to see such interest in today's session, and we are thrilled that so many of you are joining us live. A recording of the session will be made available through ABNN for all to view or review at any time. So if there's anybody who missed the session today, just let them know. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the place where we at Fuse Social are fortunate to call home. I respectfully acknowledge that we reside and operate from Treaty 8 land, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree and Dene. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis settlements in the Métis Nation of Alberta, regions 1, 4, 5, and 6, within the historical Northwest Mid-Métis homeland. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today, and those and those who have gone before us. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude on the territory of others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant communities. My apologies, hold on one. I'll just take this moment to share that I do have a little one sick home with me today, and he's been quiet all morning until I started talking, so apologies for that. All right. Although many of you are familiar with ABNN and our collective work, we'd like to share a little bit about the network for those who have yet to become acquainted. ABNN is not a standalone organization. Rather, we are an independent network of nonprofits that work together to strengthen the sector's value and impact. ABNN took some time over this year to speak with nonprofits across the province to make sure that we were focusing our efforts where they were most needed or wanted. Through this work, we have brought the following focuses to our activities. Number one is relationship building. We have been and continue to gather those across our sector who wish to meet and connect with each other. The next gathering is scheduled for October 11th, and we would like to thank Volunteer Alberta for co-hosting these gatherings. We invite you to join us to discuss in this discussion about what matters most to you. Number two is relevant communications. We send news and opportunities for nonprofits out regularly through the ABNN newsletter. And number three is sector involvement. Events like this one and upcoming webinars with Revenue Canada are part of how we serve as a bridge between nonprofits and those that support and work with them across Alberta. ABNN also has two working committees specifically focused on nonprofit data and government relations. You can find out more about our collective work as well as how to get involved through albertanonprofits.ca. Big thank you as well to the Suncor Energy Foundation for their continued support of Alberta Nonprofit Network. And thank you also to the ABNN Network Stewards who are part of hosting today's session. These include Calgary Chamber of Volunteer Organizations, Edmonton Chamber of Voluntary Organizations, Fuse Social, Volunteer Alberta, Volunteer Lethbridge, and Integral.org. I'm pleased to introduce Paul Duthie of Common Good Plan, who will be presenting today's webinar, Attracting and Retaining Nonprofit Talent with a Group Retirement Plan. In addition to driving Common Good's growth, Paul's role is building on Common Good's strong relationships within the nonprofit sector and sharing Common Good's message that every Canadian deserves to have access to group retirement savings that will allow them to save for a comfortable retirement. After the presentation, we invite you to submit your questions for Paul through the chat function below. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Paul. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Shannon. And thank you to all of you in the audience. Wish I could be there and wish we could all be there in person to share this conversation. And I also want to say that I'm super excited to be talking about this. This is a subject matter that I'm really excited about. It's far more interesting than you could possibly imagine, although I know that for a lot of you, it is a serious topic because of recruitment and retention issues, but it also goes far beyond that. So I just wanted to quickly, just having a little difficulty with moving the slides. There we go. Just wanted to quickly cover off what we're going to learn today. The most important thing is that offering a group retirement plan helps with recruitment and retention. So hopefully you'll understand when you come away from this hour just how important this is to prospective employees and job seekers and even people who you want to retain. It's a critical issue, and we'll discuss why. Secondly, the ability to offer a group retirement plan makes a huge impact on people's lives relative to having to do it alone. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's really important that you do this just to increase the value for make people's retirement savings go further. And finally, I'll talk about how not all retirement plans are the same. So there's a wide range of offerings out there. I'll talk about some of the things that you can look for in a retirement plan. But to start off with, I'd like to talk about how this is really the story in Canada of the haves and the have-nots. So if you're a part of education or some healthcare organizations, government organizations, a lot of times you have access to a direct benefit pension where you may put in a lot, but you also get a lot back, and you also get a guaranteed return, often 75% of your final 5 year of the average of your final 5 years earnings for the rest of your life. And then there's some people who have generational wealth. But for most Canadians, for pretty much everybody else, they're in the have-not category. And some of the statistics that stand out are that 3 out of every 4 Canadians are concerned about having enough money in retirement. And it's not just people close to retirement. That ratio is pretty much across the board. Younger people don't have a clue how they're going to save for retirement. And older people, well, when I say older, preface that by saying maybe people over 50 might already be comfortable that they've addressed the issue. So it really is across the board that people are concerned about retirement regardless of age. And the issue is particularly salient in the nonprofit sector. So 50% of nonprofit employees don't have a plan for retirement savings. A lot of the larger nonprofits do offer a plan, but most of the smaller ones do not. And as we all know, a lot of times nonprofit employees make less doing the work they love than working in the private sector. And so it's really harder for them, relatively speaking, to save for retirement. And the upshot of it all from a social perspective is if you look at people near retirement, say those 50 and over, the median retirement savings of people without pensions is $3,000. So that means 50% of the population in Canada in this demographic has less than $3,000 set aside for retirement. So that's the background. That's the problem that we're confronted with as a society. This is an issue that's affecting most of our employees in their personal lives. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the gender retirement gap, because I'm aware that my audience and 70% of your employees on average are female or are women. And women make less than men. And even though their savings rates relative to their earnings are about the same, it's only 1% less among women, due to the fact that they earn less, they're looking at up to 2 years, having to work 2 years longer to reach that retirement readiness. And when we talk about retirement readiness, we're talking about the ability to live in retirement at more or less the same comfort level. So, for example, someone who makes $60,000 a year in their working life, they'll need less in retirement. So 70% of that is really what the target is in terms of maintaining the same standard of living because your expenses are lower. And that's considered retirement readiness. And women have to work longer to get there on average. And the last figure is glaring as well. That's a 30% gap in total savings at retirement between men and women. Women have less, and most nonprofit workers are women. So this is a very, very germane issue. So I've kind of painted the picture of the haves and the have-nots. Most of us are the have-nots. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about how it relates to recruitment, retention, and also even rewarding your current employees, because these are some interesting statistics too. And by the way, this presentation is going to be made available to everybody afterwards. So you'll have this data available to you. So that they say that there's an old saying, I don't know how many of you have heard it, that you know it's a recession when your neighbor loses their job, and you know it's a depression if you lose your job. And that principle kind of applies to labor shortage, at least for the past 20 years, probably longer. Most of my career, I've heard about the war for talent, or how difficult it is to recruit and how it's only getting worse. And it's always been a major topic in HR circles. How do you recruit top talent? But you don't really need statistics lately, it seems, with COVID and the Great Resignation, as it's called. We're feeling it. We don't need a journal to tell us that this is a problem, because we're feeling it and our network is feeling it, and there's a huge competition out there. But just so you know what the journals are saying, 68% of Canadian businesses are having a hard time hiring people they need. Over half have had at least one open position for 4 months or longer, a position they just can't seem to fill. And 84% of Canadian companies expect that this is going to continue. So this is a problem they see that is here to stay for the foreseeable future. I know, talking to my clients, it's really hard to fill executive director positions, and oftentimes I hear that recruiting is hard, fine, but if they were to lose certain key employees, that would be devastating. So retention is also a big part of this. Let's talk about recruiting first. When you look at recruitment, retirement benefits are the most important benefit that you could offer according to the people you're hiring. It's more important than health, dental, and life insurance. It's the top concern, and that's not surprising given the fact that we have universal health care and the statistics that I showed you on the earlier slides. Retirement benefits, retirement income, I should say, is on the minds of people at all age groups. Turnover is also a big problem. So retention is a growing concern, as I mentioned, for employers, especially in the nonprofit sector. Many nonprofits call it the Great Resignation. And the pandemic has only made this situation worse. So we're seeing most employers experiencing higher employee turnover. People can work from home now. And when I think of our clients in the nonprofit sector, whether it be health or client-facing services, it seems to me that a lot of nonprofit workers can't work from home because they're on the front lines. And whereas if they chose another job, perhaps they could. And then they would have the benefits of working from home. So you have to make the employment experience as favorable and as positive and compelling as possible. 66% of employers expect this to get worse. And I think that, inflation's not helping. It's just a really tough time out there in the world. I'm sorry, I'm just having a little trouble with my controller. There we go. This is an interesting statistic because when you're looking to retain people, obviously, it's obvious to me anyway that salary is the most important factor, but look how close offering a retirement plan comes to that. It's almost as if people feel that it's almost one and the same. Only 2% fewer ranked it as extremely important, and actually 2% more ranked it as very important, coming up with to a total of the same figure. So it's neck and neck. It's more or less considered the same thing. And retirement benefits help employers reduce turnover rates, as I said, and according to some statistics, can increase job tenure up to 6 years. Because if people don't have that worry about retirement income, they feel less pressure to move to a higher paying job. So we've talked about recruitment, we've talked about retention, and now I want to talk a little bit about reward. Liz Mulholland is the CEO of Prosper Canada, and she sits on our steering committee, and she said something that really stuck with me and really has a lot to do with the mission of my organization, and I'm sure many of you feel it too. And I'll read it out to you. She said, "For too long, workers in the nonprofit sector have had to mortgage their future to do the work that they love. And that's not sustainable for them and their families." And so when we talk about confronting poverty and some of the missions and values that drive our organizations, it's also to think about it from the perspective of the people who actually do the work. They need this too. And as we already discussed, they're not the highest income bracket in Canada. So they fall squarely in the category of people who are the most vulnerable. Modest earners, middle income earners, and women, and people who could potentially earn more in the private sector. So when we talk about rewarding, we've already covered the fact that 75% of employees are worried about having enough money in retirement. This next statistic is really interesting. 71% say that they would forego a higher salary for a better retirement plan. And I'll dive into some of the reasons that may be in the next section of this presentation. And 78% view retirement benefits as a critical factor in deciding to take a job. So if you've recently tried to recruit someone and lost out to another employer, it might be interesting for you to look at that job description and see whether they were offering retirement benefits, and see if the other organizations you're competing against in their job descriptions, if they're saying they offer RSP match. So that's the state of play in terms of recruitment and retention. And right now, I'd like to talk about how your employees actually have the odds stacked against them if they try to go it alone. If they don't have a group retirement plan, what is the value that you're offering by providing them with one? And why? Why is it as high as it is? Because according to a report called The Value of a Good Pension, it can be worth up to $900,000 in lifetime member value, just offering a group retirement plan. Caveat, we were one of the authors of this report. In fact, when we were a research institution, we were looking into the reasons why there is such a shortage of retirement savings in Canada. And so we co-authored this report with Healthcare of Ontario Pension Plans. And we were able to identify where that number comes from, where that $900,000 number comes from, and why people who are doing it alone are not getting there, and people who are getting the help they need through their employer are getting there in terms of achieving retirement readiness. And I'll go through a few of the reasons right now, and then we'll dive into it in greater detail. One of the issues is that Canadians pay some of the highest management fees in the world. The average management fee is 2%. And so to put that in perspective, if your average gross rate of return on your investments is 5% and your management fee is 2%, that means your provider is getting 40% of your gross returns and you're getting 60% as your net returns. That's a big one, but that's only one of several. And the other one is, another one is savings discipline. And this is really interesting because people, by their nature, when they see something go bad, they get away from it. When they see something good, they go towards it. And what happens in investing in the stock market, whether it be mutual funds or individual stocks, you see an investment go down, you sell. You see an investment go up, you buy. But you're acting on past performances. That is sunk costs. And this behavior, which is completely understandable, is of buying low, of buying high, and I'm sorry, start over, of selling low and buying high gets repeated over the course of time, and people trying to time the market or buying a stock when it goes up or selling it when it goes down are doomed to repeating these behaviors that are going to hold down their returns. Whereas if they just were in it for the long run and not trying to time things, they'd probably do just fine. Another one is that people just don't have the knowledge. They don't know how much to put away each month for retirement, or how much they'll have when they retire. Even if you go on the CRA website, it's not easy to figure it out. Right now, if we were all in the same room together, I'd ask for a show of hands of how many people in the room know what their retirement benefits are going to be when they retire. And I'm confident in saying that I would see very few hands. I ask that question on most meetings, and I rarely get a response that people know. So that's really important, to educate people on how much they can receive from the government in terms of benefits upon retirement each month, because we're lucky. We live in a country where those benefits are very, very good. Another factor is that people will not invest in the right products. So the general rule of thumb is when you're young, you have an aggressive strategy where you go after a lot of stocks. And as you get close to retirement, you gradually go to a less risky platform, so that when you do retire, you're not risking, you're not a high risk state when you're at that stage when you're going to start decumulating when you retire. And people aren't generally prudent. They just don't have the knowledge to do that on their own. So for these reasons and others, but these are the main ones. There we go. It would take someone with no plan to save 1.3 million retirement savings, as a modern workplace plan that does everything right would require them to only invest $370,000 during the course of their lives. There's a lot of asterisks to this. You're never going to get everything perfect, but that's what the study found. So before I go into the last section, which is what to look for in a plan, I just want to digress here and talk about 2 slides. I mentioned earlier that Canada has some of the highest fees in the world. And during the Q&A, I'm happy to answer questions why that might be. And there are specific reasons why that might be. But other countries, including our friends to the south, the US, has much lower fees than us. And that's surprising because there's so many similarities in terms of how our economies are run. It is kind of surprising that Canada's would be so high. And I also want to spend a few moments on this slide, because this explains a lot. The word capitalism is kind of a fraught term. It evokes an emotional response. But from my perspective, and I'd be interested in the Q&A to hear other people's perspectives, capitalism is really just the phenomenon of money making money. If you have capital, that capital will earn money without you doing any work. That it works on its own. And so when we look at this in this graphic, I can illustrate this for you. So if you take $75 per pay period, it could turn into $434,879 based on a 5% return annually. And so for after 10 years of putting away $75 into your retirement every pay period, you've got $45,000. In the next period of 10 years, you're still putting in the same amount, but it doesn't go up 45,000, it goes up 75,000. And for the next 10-year period, again, putting in the same amount every pay period, it's $120,000 additional. And then for the next pay period, arguably the most important as you approach retirement, you're talking about $195,000, not $45,000, but you're just putting in $75 per pay period, and that's going up by $195,000. And you wouldn't believe it if there wasn't math behind it, but that is the power of compound savings. And that to me is what we mean by capitalism. When money is making money on its own because it's compounding, because it's increasing in value. And you're getting interest on your interest is another way of looking at it. Anyway, very math centric, but I think that that is a very powerful way of looking at it that a lot of people don't consider. And that's a big reason why putting a little bit away every week and having that savings discipline makes such a big difference. A lot of people, I didn't mention this one, but a lot of people just at the end of the year or beginning of the year, they put aside $5,000 or $2,000, whatever they have, towards their retirement. They only put away what they can afford. Whereas people in a group retirement plan, they kind of have the benefit of, they don't see it and they don't miss it. It just comes out and they live their lives, and they live their lives to a standard of living that they can afford. And this phenomenon happens. This builds behind the scenes. Again, happy to talk. Just wanted to share those two slides because I think they're so valuable. So finally, we want to talk a little bit about what a good retirement plan looks like. And I've covered some of these before. Smart saving, saving every month, and increasing your savings over time. People who put away a portion of their paycheck every single pay period are 15 times more likely to achieve retirement readiness than people who just put aside lump sums when they can afford to. I've talked about low fees, and again, compounding comes into that. The money you pay in fees is money that's not going to make money on itself as the years go by. Another important thing to take into consideration is benefits optimizations, and a lot of plans don't really cover this. And there's some elements to this. For example, if you are employ someone in a lower or modest income bracket, they might qualify for GIS, guaranteed income supplement benefits upon retirement. If they have an RRSP, that gets clawed back. So it's really important to be able to offer both a TFSA and an RRSP and know when to invest in each as a retirement savings vehicle. Smart investing, a diversified portfolio that gets asset allocation right. So I'll talk a little bit more about this, but that's all about allocating risk over your lifetime, so you get less risky over time. Tax minimization, I talked about this a little bit. TFSAs, if you're in a lower tax bracket, you're probably better off. When I say lower, I don't necessarily mean low. I mean under 50. A lot of provinces, $50,000, you pay higher taxes for the amount over that. But if you're under that number, sometimes TFSAs are a better way to go for saving for retirement, even though they're often thought of as savings for purposes other than retirement, like a car or something along those lines. And then every plan should also be portable. And there's a lot of great things about direct benefit plans, but one thing is you can't take it with you when you terminate your employment. And in this day and age, people move jobs a lot, and they want to be able to take their plan with them. So if you do offer a group retirement plan, you might get pushback from your employees if it's not a plan for life, a plan they can take with them as they go from job to job. So I'll talk a little bit more in detail on some of these issues. So we talked a little bit about how the government benefits in Canada are great, and I'll tell you how good they are. Just as an example, if you make $60,000 a year today, and this is all adjusted for inflation. So let's say you're making $60,000, you're paying CPP. You're paying every paycheck, you're paying taxes on that. But that's going back to you. And we have a very robust pension plan. The country, the sovereignty of Canada has a very robust pension plan. And what it means is that someone making $60,000 a year is going to get about over $2,000 a month in retirement benefits for the rest of their life when they retire. If they have retired at 65, they'll get even more if they retire later than, and less if they retire before they're 65. To the extent that it's not uncommon for people, modest earners who have worked and paid into the system their entire lives, actually have a higher income upon retirement than when they were working. It's not uncommon to see that. And I'll be happy to talk about that in the Q&A as well. Again, savings discipline is key to success. So our plan and other plans do offer the opportunity for people to incrementally increase their savings over time as they can afford it, so they can narrow that retirement gap. And our plan actually shows what the gap is in a graph on the employee dashboard, so they can actually track it as they go. So when we talk about retirement plans, a lot of like Sun Life, Manulife, a lot of the larger providers, they're investment vehicles for retirement, but it's really important to have a plan where people can plan their retirement and see how they're tracking towards it. Is something that I would very strongly consider, ask you to consider when you look at a plan. And then the nice thing, we talked about allocating risk, and the gold standard of this is called target date funds. And this is very, very common in the United States and in most countries. It's catching on here in Canada. And what that means is, let's say you're going to retire in 2045. You would have a target date fund, with a target date of 2045. And every year, it will automatically reallocate your assets to make them more conservative, to reflect your proximity to retirement. And this target date fund approach is the perfect combination of risk and safety, risk allocation, to reflect your proximity to retirement. And also they tend to have low fees. So this is kind of where the industry is moving, and I encourage you to research it and consider whether it's right for you. And finally, portability. Members have full control with us anyway of access to track and update their plan. And when they retire, when they terminate and go to another employer or not, that plan goes with them and they still pay low fees. So with a direct benefit plan, you will not always be able to take it with you unless you go to a similar provider. And with direct contribution plans, a lot of times when you leave your employer, you are back in the retail world. The provider, Manulife, Sun Life, Canada Life, they'll put you on an individual plan, and the management fees could be higher. With group retirement plans, you're sort of pooling your resources, your buying power to get lower fees, although they're still, as I mentioned, quite high. They're lower than the people in the retail world pay. So that's important too, that people can maintain low fees and move their existing plan to an individual plan. So I know I've covered a lot here. I've tried to share with you the state of play in Canada, and specifically as it relates to recruitment, retention, and rewarding employees, and also go into some of the most important details of why people have it so tough out there without a group retirement plan, and what aspects you can address through a group retirement plan to make the results much better for your employees. I've tried not to talk too much about Common Good, my employer who brought me here today, but I would love to tell you more about Common Good. We're a department of Commonwealth, and we are specifically focused on the nonprofit sector. I'd love to show you more about our platform and how it works. You can reach me at that email address there that barely fits on the page. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to a Q&A session if our facilitators are ready.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing more information about Common Good and the importance of a group retirement plan. As mentioned, you can submit any of your questions that you have for Paul through the chat box, and we'll make sure that we kind of get those answered for you. So the questions, I've got a couple here. So the first question is this still relevant if my staff is mostly older and close to retirement?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I spoke a little bit about that. I'll dive into it a little bit more. The best way to find out is to ask them. And what you'll find generally is they'll fall into two categories. They'll fall into the category of the individual who has been saving for retirement, and that person may recognize what a challenge it is and may find it very, very important to continue doing that and really welcome a group retirement plan. I think you'll find a very small minority will be like, oh no, I'm good, I've already saved for retirement, although there will be a few of those. And then you'll have a third category of people who are not prepared for retirement, and time is kind of running out on them. And those are the people who will find it most valuable. So at the end of the day, if you do have an older workforce, they're probably going to be more inclined to understand the value of saving for retirement, and they'll probably embrace it, I would, generally speaking.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question I have is this still relevant if my staff is mostly younger and not worried about retirement?
So yeah, that is the flip side of the question. And what we found is that there are so many benefits. When you talk about the compounding chart that I mentioned, starting early is great. And I think parents will advise their grown-up children to get in on that, especially if there's a match. And we haven't spoken much about contribution matches, but you can offer a match of any amount. You can offer 1% to 5%, where you match 100% of employee contributions up to 5% of their salary, as an example. You can also do it so that it's equitable, so that you offer $100 per pay period to every employee. There's a variety of ways that you can do it. But if a young person starts saving early in life, a tremendous amount of doors open to them. One of them is the home buyer's plan. So you can, the number I think now is 25,000, although I believe it's going up, $25,000 towards your down payment on your house. You can borrow from yourself, from your own RRSP plan. And so it's a great way to save for a house, especially if you're getting an employer match. And if it's coming straight from your payroll, it's pre-tax. It doesn't get taxed until you take it out 40 years from now. Even if you take it out for the home buyer's plan, it doesn't get taxed. So there's a lot of advantages in terms of leveraging your money, your investments early if you get started when you're young, when you're 25, 30, 35. There's a lot to be gained by that.
Awesome, thank you. When is it appropriate for an organization to decide to allocate employer contributions into a DPSP?
Well, that's a very good question. And that DPSP stands for Deferred Profit Sharing Plan. And that depends on the organization. There are some advantages to it. It's a little bit more complex. So that's the kind of question that I would have to take off on the side and just do a consultation with, because it really depends on a lot of different factors. I see it more in the private sector than in the nonprofit sector. But yeah, whoever's asked that question, I'd be happy to book some time with you to discuss your particular situation.
Great. Can you speak more about how the Common Good plan differs from other providers such as Manulife? What are the benefits or the advantages?
Well, our management fees are much lower. So with Manulife, they're generally up towards 1.75 to 2%. You would know your management fees. And what we're offering is target date funds. So we guide your employees through, and we also offer an enrollment process. So when they enroll, I showed you a few slides that covered that. They go through the process of telling us, or telling the system as they enroll, how much do you earn? What can you expect from government benefits when you retire, and what is your gap? This is what you really want to focus on. You don't want to really focus on, I need $500,000 or $1 million when you retire. You want to look at, what do I need per month? So if I'm making $60,000 a year, I'm probably going to, the average person going to need 70% of that amount to retire at more or less the same standard of living. And so how much do I have to save to achieve that? Without that crucial piece of information, what value is the rest of it all? If you don't know, if you can't plan for retirement by knowing where you stand vis-a-vis what you're going to need, it's just you're just shooting blind. And I think that's the general issue, whether it be Manulife, Sun Life, Canada Life. They control most of the market, and they're legacy providers. So they're not digital at all. They don't have platforms where people can interact with them in a simple, easy to use way to really plan for their retirement. And Common Good and some of the fintech, as they're called, companies out there are able to do that. So I think that's the main thing.
With Common Good, is there a minimum number of staff for a group plan?
That's a good question. With some direct benefit plans, they won't consider you if you're a small organization, and some legacy providers like Manulife, they're going to charge you more if you're small. That doesn't apply in either case to Common Good. We're funded by the nonprofit sector. Some generous foundations have provided us seed money, and our steering committee is entirely comprised of nonprofit executives. So even though we're part of Commonwealth, a for-profit company, Common Good has a fiduciary responsibility to nonprofits. And one of those elements of responsibility is we don't turn anyone away, and we don't charge extra for anyone. So everybody more or less pays the same. There is some fine print in there, but basically our standard fees apply for everyone, and they're much, much lower than Manulife.
Can you talk a little bit more about what those fees are for Common Good's target date funds?
Yeah, so I love these questions. I promised I wouldn't talk about Common Good. I don't want to be too self-promoting, but I'm really grateful for all these questions about Common Good. Target date, with our target date funds, we have two fee structures. So some organization use advisors, and if you use an advisor, we partner with your advisor, and we work out an equitable management fee structure. If you don't have an advisor, we have a standard pricing package, and it works like this. Your management fee, as you may recall from that slide, is 0.6%, so 60 basis points, almost just over half of 1%. So maybe a third or a fourth of what you'd pay with otherwise with some other providers. However, that's partially funded by the employer. So the 0.6 is what the employee, and all these management fees are what the employee pays, not the employer. We also charge a monthly subscription fee of $10 per participant. So let's say 80% of your employees participate in the plan. Let's say you have 10 employees, 8 participate. Your fee would be your subscription fee would be $80 per month. So it's a little bit different of a structure, but it still works out the same in the sense that it's a lot less than what you would pay with the legacy providers.
What is the typical vesting period in a nonprofit organization? And do GRSPs have a vesting period for employer contributions?
You get to decide that. So we don't call it vesting. It's an eligibility period. So I'm gonna. This is kind of a technical question. It's a great question, but it's different than vesting, because what happens is, let's say you say, well, people can be eligible for our group retirement plan after they've been with us for 90 days, and their other benefits kick in. This is just like those. So it's a waiting period. It's an eligibility period. And then they just become eligible, and they roll in with everybody else. But with what's called a plan design, you have a lot of flexibility in designing a plan with Common Good. And again, it's partly because we have a digital platform. We can accommodate these things. You can have multiple groups. So you could have a management group with one set of criteria and matches and an employee group with another set. And you could also do it by not seniority, tenure. So how long have they been with the organization? You could say if someone's been with the organization, anyone who's been with the organization longer than 3 years gets a 5% match. And then anyone less gets a 3% match. And then when they sort of vest, if you will, using your terminology, once they've been there 3 years, they could kick up to the 5-year, a 5% bracket. And that's a really effective retention tool to offer that carrot to people. So again, when it comes to plan details, some plan providers are more flexible than others. I would say that we're on the more flexible side, and we're very proactive in sort of being creative with you and looking at what's going to create the highest participation rate, and B, satisfy your budget. And while we're on that subject, you can also, since we don't have a criteria in terms of the size of an organization or number of participants, we also don't have a criteria in terms of the budget, how much you pay in. With direct benefit plans, you have to commit a certain budget. But you can come to us and say, we have X number of employees and our budget is X number of dollars. Let's work backwards from that to create a plan design. We're more than happy to do that with you and look at the different plan designs and what percentage that would be, or what fixed amount that would be, based on anticipated participation rates, to arrive at that budget figure that you cannot go beyond. That's a big factor for nonprofits because funding is so determinant on funding what you can afford, and that varies from year to year. So we can help you reduce your liability in terms of exposure to not having enough funds.
Are you able to share with us a little bit about any average match for employer or employee contributions?
That is a great question. Yes, I can actually, and I have a chart that I could send along separately, but it goes like this. It's really rare for a nonprofit to match more than 5%, but 5% is also the most common. So 29%, I don't know why that stuck in my head, but 29% of our clients contribute a 5% match, which is higher than any other percentage, but almost all the rest of those percentages are less than 5%. So you could also say that, 95% of matches are 5% or less. And they're either 5%, 4%, 3%, 2%. Just adding on to that, and this is, don't hold me to this. This is just anecdotal information. If you don't contribute anything, you're still offering a huge benefit, but only about 20% of your employees will take you up on it. Those that do will be grateful for it. So it's certainly better than nothing. If you have no budget, you should still consider a group retirement plan, because it will help some of your employees. You might, with a 2% match, you might be around 60%. And then at 4 and 5%, you're looking at over 80% of your employees will match. And over 80% of your employees will participate, and over 80% of your employees will maximize their contribution. They will come up to whatever you're offering. So I know I sped through that quickly and faster than most people can write, but those are the numbers, and I'm happy to show you, send over a slide that illustrates that information.
All right, and our last question, something you mentioned you could talk about more in the Q&A. It's, how can some people make more money with CPP in retirement than what they made while working? And a second part, if you also have RRSPs or pension, does that affect what you get from CPP?
Yes. Yes and no. So if you're on a direct benefit plan, they take away your CPP. Otherwise, no, you get it no matter what. The first half of that question, it's because the floors, there's no floor to how little you can earn in the workplace, right? But when you retire, there is minimums that the government will give you so that you can achieve, so you can not be in poverty. When you're working, you can be the working poor, and there's millions of people in Canada that work and are still not above the poverty line. But when those benefits kick in, they're more generous than the workplace in some cases. And added to that, I had a good friend. I used to work at Canadian Red Cross. He was a facilities guy, and he'd been there, 40 years. And he said to me, yeah, I can't wait to retire. I'm going to be rich. And he's probably a guy who's making 35, 40 grand a year. But he's been putting into the Canadian Red Cross plan since 1982 or whatever. And so there's a lot of people out there that fit into that category where they've achieved, despite being modest earners, they've achieved this great retirement savings, and they're going to get the government benefits. So they're not going to be a burden to their kids. They don't have to worry about retiring, running out of money when they're 85. They're fine, despite having an entire life of modest earning. They're totally fine.
With Common Good, do employees have access to advisors?
That's a great question. And when I hear some of these great questions, I think, why don't I cover this during my presentation? But yes, and that's a distinct when you mentioned Manulife, whoever that questioner was, it is so hard to get. I shouldn't say anything. Forget I said Manulife. When you call some of these legacy providers, you can't get a response. But with us, you have a link. You can click and book a 30-minute consultation anytime with one of our experts, not even a customer service person, one of our experts, and we can talk you through whatever issues you have. In fact, when you enroll for the plan, you get the link right there. Do you want to do it yourself? And it takes average 13 minutes to enroll by yourself, or do you want to do this tandem with an expert? And so, yeah, we do offer personalized customer service to both employers and employees. We're a small enough organization that we offer personal service. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for answering everyone's questions. Thank you to everybody on the line today for submitting all of your thoughtful questions. We really appreciate it. ABNN will be sharing a link to the recording with everyone who's registered for today's sessions. I know there was a question about slides, and yes, I believe those are going out as well. So I'll just forward across. We welcome any and all new ideas, feedback, and questions on any of our activities at ABNN. We're focused on continuing to amplify the voices of the Alberta nonprofit sector, especially in the critical areas you've told us matter most right now. You can sign up for our newsletter, join us at an upcoming opportunity to engage, or contact us directly to share your thoughts, your good work, or your interests. Just want to give one more thank you to Paul, Common Good Plan, and the Suncor Energy Foundation, the ABNN Network stewards, and everyone in attendance today. Enjoy the rest of your morning and your day, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thank you all.